I think causing people to be able to identify certain patterns in the market because they've actually seen those patterns themselves goes a huge ways. I think that we just keep seeing time and again that nothing works, at least for teaching trading, like causing people to actually trade and to notice certain patterns and certain behaviors, to have certain muscle memory in their fingers of what different kinds of trades look like. And that is going to get them so much closer to the goal of being able to do good trades when the opportunities actually arise than any amount of trying to reason from first principles or any amount of trying to memorize the full range of what kinds of trading behaviors could happen.
One of the things that trivially falls out of this model, which I think you mentioned last year, is that the people who come in with the best approximation, even if they bingo it directly, are not necessarily the people who make the most money trading, right?
Yep, that's correct.
It's interesting to see my code before and after working at Stripe, which is not in trading, but is in the financial industry. I got much more defensive after working with it. And I wasn't an engineer at Stripe, but the notion of like a for loop that can lose money on every iteration of the for loop is very clarifying for the mind.
Indeed.
And so there was something I wrote last year, trivial bit of code, could have been 5 lines long, was 200 lines long because it was 195 lines of if you detect X, die. If you detect Y, die. Blah, 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 blah. A feature that goes into all my systems these days that I affectionately call the Madagascar button. Shut down everything. Make it very easy to shut down everything. If you want to survive another day, make sure the system has a Madagascar button in it. Hi-ho, everybody. My name is Patrick McKenzie, better known as Patio11 on the internets. And we're here in a video studio this time, but Ricki was actually the first audio guest of the podcast way back a year and change ago, I suppose, when we started it.
Yeah, almost exactly a year ago, Patrick.
So, brief recap of history for people who weren't here for the first episode. You previously did trading professionally at one of the firms that does that professionally. And you, I think at the time, were mooting running a business to train it to people, right? And hadn't actually started?
Yeah, so I traded at Jane Street Capital for a few years professionally. And after that, I left and entered a period of life that I called my explore before exploit phase, where I did a bunch of different things for periods of about 3 months at a time to figure out what is it that I'm actually good at? What is it that I actually enjoy and that I want to do with my life? And about a year ago, I was on the edge of figuring out the answer to that. I'd been running these trading boot camps, but in a very kind of casual capacity. I'd taught them to high schoolers at a program called the Atlas Fellowship. And I was really enjoying teaching them, but had at that point never charged anybody money for them and was teaching them only on a somewhat casual ad hoc basis. Leading up to what is now called festival season at Lighthaven, which is where you and I are actually filming this episode right now, there was going to be a 1-week summer camp period, and they were looking for programming for people to run. So the person organizing it reached out to me and said, "Hey, Ricki, I know you run these trading boot camps. Would you like to run one at summer camp?" And I said, "Sure, whatever. I don't care. Happy to do that." And then Patrick, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, Ricki, I heard you run these trading boot camps. Do you want to talk to me about it on a podcast?" And I said, "Sure, whatever. I don't care. Happy to do that." At that point, I was way more consumed by running a giant puzzle hunt that I was running, so I didn't think twice about either of these decisions. Turns out that podcast episode has been the counterfactual launch point of the company Arbor that I now run, because a whole bunch of people tuned in, listened to this episode about the trading bootcamp that I had just run and said, "When is your next bootcamp? I would like to give you my money." So I said, August. And ran my first paid trading bootcamp in August. Now, at that point, I had a complicated exponential pricing scheme to determine how much people should pay for tickets. Word of note to listeners, do not use complicated exponential pricing schemes, even when you are marketing to quantitative trading bootcamp students. They will correctly be suspicious about whether there's something going on that they don't understand. And in the end, we figured out that charging a flat rate for people, which now we charge about $2,000 per student, though it's been rising over the past year, makes a lot more sense as a business decision and for accounting purposes. Mm-hmm. Our first paid bootcamp was in August, and since then we've run 6 paid bootcamps, the most recent one culminating this past week, the following year's quote-unquote summer camp at festival season at Lighthaven. So when you and I spoke, I was really only getting started thinking about this as like a serious thing to structure a curriculum around. And we developed some internal trading games and some ways to create this curriculum. But in the past year, figuring out what are the use cases of the people signing up for this? Why is it that they're paying money and taking a few days off of work to learn about trading? What is it that we can uniquely provide to them? And what do we want to be providing to them? Have been a really fun set of questions for me and a growing team now to think about.
I would love to dig in on the trading pedagogy specifically to the extent that you want to share it. But let's start with a bit of the higher level question of, if one is not using this as a stepping stone into working in the industry or not using it as a stepping stone at running their own fund, what are the metaphors and kind of ways of seeing the world that trading gets you, which are less convenient to get to if you simply haven't done it?
Yeah, so I think a big part of the value that we provide is helping provide people with this trader mindset, this set of tools for looking at the world that they might not get access to basically anywhere else. I think a lot of people know what it means to look at the world through the framework of a mathematician or an economist or a psychologist. And
I would press X to doubt on that with regards to most definitions of many, but yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Fair enough. Let me rephrase. I think the tools are publicly available, such that if somebody wants to look at the world through the lens of an economist, they can go and read books or take courses or otherwise engage with material that allows them an on-ramp to do so. I think this is true for many different domains, and interestingly, not very true for trading. And this makes sense if you think about the incentives involved. The people who know how to think like a trader, the people who have honed those skills, who have done reps and reps and reps of practicing trading and figuring out what works, aren't especially interested in spreading that information to the mass public. I'm super interested in that because it's so damn fun. I just really enjoy teaching trading, and I've fallen in love with it. And I also think that there are a lot of things that people can benefit from in understanding how to think like a trader that are overwhelmingly not limited to financial markets. So a lot of what we're trying to do in Trading Bootcamp is not just give people the skills required to turn around and make profitable trades in their personal accounts or turn around and get jobs with quantitative trading firms, but instead be able to turn around and make good life choices informed by the ways that traders think about the world that have a unique additional component to the ways that mathematicians, economists, software developers, et cetera, already have for thinking about the world.
So aside from the most obvious level of like thinking much more numerically and hopefully more rigorously, what are the ways that traders think that might be less common in, say, the milieus that usually traders are drawn from?
Sure. So one of the main ways that we try to hammer in for people is thinking using heuristics and thinking in a way that allows us to understand approximately what is the correct answer, what is the right direction, what is the right order of magnitude. And it is okay if you haven't yet gotten to the point of what is the exact right decimal point answer to this question, because often being the first one to get there is actually worth quite a bit. And having an answer that is approximately right and directionally correct can be enormously valuable if you're the first person to get that answer. Understanding what kinds of heuristics will get you to the approximate ballpark answer quickly is a pretty important part of being a trader. It's important whether you see financial numbers flashing in front of you, all of a sudden something has changed in the markets and you need to recalibrate what your fair values, what your expected value of a bunch of different stock prices are. And it's important to figure out, where is there the most value for me to be focusing my time? Should I be spending my time, focusing on the trading in front of me, or spending time with my family, or working on hiring other people who will be able to do the same activities that I'm doing now, or, journaling in my journal, or getting 8 hours of sleep a night? I think the answers to a lot of these kind of meta prioritization questions do often have interplays with ways that traders might think about how to make decisions when you're presented with a vast number of different opportunity sets and you need to make trade-offs between them. I think about the world in terms of trading in a lot of different ways. My wife sometimes makes fun of the fact that often I will describe what other people would describe as a normal social interaction as a trade, a context in which multiple people have what to gain from it. There's a lot of value on the table. Often these things are positive value. I think, when we talk about trading, we're often talking about zero-sum situations, but trading happens and takes place because we have a lot to gain from one another. And anytime that you are making a decision about what to do, that you have something to gain and the other person might also have something to gain, when there's maybe some degree of disagreement between you about how much there is to gain, but in fact, that might be downstream of valuing things different amounts, there might be a profitable or a valuable trade for you to do. And better understanding frameworks that traders use when looking at economics, when looking at financial markets, and applying those to other areas of our lives can be pretty helpful. Let me give another example of this kind of thing.
Sure.
One of the main ideas that you and I talked about on the podcast a year ago, and indeed one of the main lessons of our Trading Bootcamp, is that of adverse selection. that conditional on getting to do a trade, conditional on being presented with an opportunity, you should adjust your models of the world in the direction that this trade might be slightly less favorable than you otherwise would have thought. Mm-hmm. When driving around the streets in the neighborhood that I live in, Washington Heights, New York, it's pretty hard to find a parking spot. Sometimes my wife and I will refer to this as the tour of the Washington Heights fire hydrants. Mm-hmm. We'll see a spot, we'll look, oh, great, there's an opportunity over there. Oh, nope, there's a fire hydrant. Oh, there's another fire hydrant, etc. And even when it looks like there's a spot available, often that'll be because there's alternate side parking rules in effect that day and we simply didn't read the street signs properly. Occasionally, you'll see a car and you'll go, oh, or you'll see a fire hydrant and you'll go, oh, I wish that fire hydrant weren't there. But if that fire hydrant weren't there, in all likelihood, a car would be. Mm-hmm. Because conditional on getting to pull into that parking spot, it's way less likely that it actually has value to you. Mm-hmm. I think that understanding the ways in which adverse selection creeps into every part of everyday life, that anytime you're at the grocery store and able to choose from a pile of tomatoes, you need to be thinking about, the tomatoes in the front might actually not be as good because other people have looked at them and decided against them. Maybe I'll take one all the way from the back that people haven't already encountered and decided to pass over. Mm-hmm. Can be a useful set of tools for making decisions that look out for your interests, regardless of whether that opportunity set is one that is strictly economic or one that just has to do with other things that you encounter on a day-to-day basis.
I would agree that people largely don't have a great intuition for this, and it shows up everywhere in life, including things like people do not quickly model the equilibria in iterated games. And so they might assume everyone on the market for this job is an idiot. I've interviewed 5 people and they're all terrible. It's like, well, there were other people who were assessed by the market for competence and they now have jobs. And the people who are still on the market are the competence distribution that you're detecting. And yet we don't, well, shaking my fist about the starfighter thing again. People can listen to the last episode. We probably won't talk about it too much, but we still persist in having systems and processes that are not informed by that understanding.
You see this on the job market for sure. You also see this on the dating market. Basically, anytime you're constraining a population to what part of that population is actually still available, or let's say is interested in getting a job or getting a date, but hasn't had the opportunity to yet and is still searching for that thing, you're looking at a more specific slice and an adversely selected slice in this case compared to what you otherwise would be. And I think understanding these selection effects and how they affect what the range of counterparties you might be trading against is, what the range of opportunities in terms of trades on the order book or employees that you could potentially hire or other possibilities like that, restaurants with open reservations available, things along those lines, will help you make wise choices that understand what the actual details facing you are.
It's often something that I see in the financial industry and not specifically trading related ways, how there's differentiation between products at banks, for example, and using the differentiation from products, people often assume, sometimes they go as far as assuming like, if I'm allowed into this product, that suggests that something must be bad about the product. It's like, well, no, you can kind of play that game at level 2 too, where if you're allowed into this product, they have constructed something where it can be mutually advantageous for 2 people. Anyhow, yeah, we're getting a little far away from the central example of trading by my digressions into everything.
Well, actually, I will say one more thing on that, because I think that a lot of people will react to me talking about adverse selection and say, okay, Ricki, if the environment is so adverse, if everyone's out to get you, why does anyone ever actually trade? And I think better understanding what conditions in an environment make adverse selection more prevalent or less prevalent can be especially useful here to figure out, when should I be trading, when should I not be trading? If you're driving around Washington Heights looking for parking spots and there are no cars around because it's a time of day that nobody's parking, then it's way more likely that a spot that you pull up to will be fine if you have a less competitive environment. Likewise, if you see somebody pull out of a spot and you have a story for why that spot is available, even better if you can ask them, why are you pulling out of that spot, and find out whether it's because, alternate side parking rules are about to go into effect and therefore it's illegal to park there, versus, oh, I just have an appointment that I need to go and meet somewhere across town. You can have a good story for why I'm getting to do this trade. I'm getting to execute on this opportunity that you otherwise might not know. And that can be a helpful motivator for feeling comfortable with the trade you're making. There are examples of positive selection all over, times where you and a counterparty might want to trade because instead of both wanting and competing for the same thing, like money, you actually want opposite things in some sense, and therefore are willing to do a trade with one another. Your desire to trade with each other, if you have anti-correlated preferences, can actually be a piece of evidence that you should be happier trading as a result. And I think that figuring out how to identify those situations is a big part of what we're trying to teach in this bootcamp in terms of teaching trader mindset.
I would love an example of a time where people have anti-correlated preferences, although I can think of a couple, but they seem less central. Maybe you have a better example off the top of your head.
Sure. Sometimes when our students are trying to decide which of multiple different groups to sort themselves into when we're splitting them into electives, some of them will have the thought, well, I know that I want to go to elective A on auction pricing, or I know that I want to go to election B on, how to get a job at a quant trading firm. And sometimes they'll say, I don't know which one I want, but I know that I just kind of trust the masses. If other people know which one's better, I want to go with that one. So I'm going to ask somebody else and follow along what they want. And then often we'll end up with an elective that's somewhat overcrowded. But sometimes people will say, I know that the thing that I want is more instructor attention, more quality time with that instructor. So whatever other people are choosing is actually the one that I want to anti-choose. I'd rather list myself as indifferent or list myself as, I'll take whatever is left over, whatever slots are still available, so that I'm in a less crowded class. And in this case, other people wanting an option is a piece of evidence for you that you don't want that, even though it might be a positive signal about the quality of that item. If the thing that you actually care about is being in the less crowded group, that can be a sign of positive selection toward the thing that you actually want, which is to be in the less crowded space.
That makes sense. And there are some times where this comes up in things as mundane as scheduling. When I'm recording podcasts at the venue that I usually use, which is not here, doing audio only, I explicitly tell them my favorite podcast times are times which are bad for almost every other user of this venue. So please book me towards or reserve availability towards things that someone who is working the typical kind of business they serve doesn't want, because that will mean it's less likely that there's jostling over this. Maybe you can give me a price break, et cetera, et cetera.
Perfect.
So you've had about a year now of teaching trading to people who are coming into trading for the first time. Before we dig into and maybe retread a little bit ground on what specifically we do that, what are the interesting things that you've learned about the class of people who maybe have less experience with trading, hitting that interface for the first time?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So like I said, before we spoke a year ago, I'd only ever taught this to people who were, for the most part, in high school or in college, pretty young, and encountering these topics for sure for the first time. Since we started running these boot camps a year ago, in part because a lot of people are taking them interested in potentially making a career transition or figuring out what jobs might be available on the market, a lot of our demographic are made up of people in their 20s and 30s. Sometimes we'll even have somebody a little bit later on in their career considering making a pivot. Sometimes we'll have a precocious high schooler or two who are a little bit bored with their usual material and want to try something out. And almost across the board, none of them have ever actually done any quantitative trading themselves. Many of them have done some amount of day trading stocks or thinking about option strategies, putting on positions. A lot of them are enmeshed in some community online of people who've thought about these things. But despite that, very
Hopefully
few
not
of them.
Wall Street bets, but
we get more than one or two from Wall Street bets types. But for the most part, our best marketing happens via word of mouth. So some people are coming and taking the trading bootcamp because they've heard that it's really fun. This is actually a pretty core contingent of ours. And maybe that's because we don't do broad enough marketing on our own and end up relying on word of mouth from past alums of ours. But it is a really nice selection effect because it means that the people who are coming are earnest and excited and not just trying to get something profitable out of it, but instead trying to have a good time. One of our former students once described us as Disneyland for nerds. And this successfully convinced all of his housemates and a whole bunch of his friends to come and take the trading bootcamp. And it's become a nice little ecosystem among our alumni, the people who are there for the nerd Disneyland experience. Another subset of people are coming to take the trading bootcamp because they really want to get a job in quantitative trading and think this might be their avenue there. And I think this is an okay reason to take the bootcamp. I used to strongly caution against this and say, we are not offering you a job. We are not giving you a job. We are not optimizing around you getting a job. And therefore, you shouldn't come if you just want a job. Despite us not especially optimizing around this, it does seem like it has actually helped a few people get jobs. In part, I think through just exposure to other people in the area, awareness of the state of the field. In part, it's hard to really know for sure because a lot of the people signing up to take this bootcamp are already going to be pretty well positioned to get jobs. But a number of people have gone from us to a quant trading internship or a full-time job offer. And for their sake, I'm happy that they're getting an opportunity to do that. But the value that I think we provide much more strongly than that is helping people figure out the answers to the questions. What is quant trading? Do I like it? And am I any good at it? In order to decide, do I want to invest a whole bunch of months or years of my life in trying to do quantitative trading, trying to prepare for interviews and internships, trying to practice whatever skills it is I'd need and put out feelers in the broader quantitative trading world, et cetera, so that they can make decisions that are looking out for their interests in environments of varying opportunity sets, which might be trying to go into quant trading or might be saying, I've tried this and it's not for me, or I think I just realistically won't succeed at this. I'm going to go and do something else with my life. And to us, that's also a great outcome.
Mm-hmm. I think, as you were saying, there's structural reasons why trading is so difficult to access. And it's behind some very forbidding permission gates, both sort of the obvious ones, one needs capital to do it. The type of quantitative trading you do often relies on access to data systems, et cetera, which would be forbiddingly difficult for people to build on their own. But you also very literally have to, beg for a job in the field. Well, do the usual set of social processes to get a job in the field, to get an experience of what the field is like. And you contrast this to other walks through life where there is some amount of gatekeeping and programming. There is some amount of, you are much more likely to get certain tiers of jobs that will expose you to certain tiers of problems if you've been through the right feeder schools and the right feeder institutions. But you can also download all the software for free on the internet and just play with it. And there is a sort of secondary information market these days of, people on YouTube who are showing people, from like literally downloading your first client to making your first program to ... to give people months or years of experience on whether they would like the actual job before they get into the actual job, which, shaking my fist, it's a shame that more professions don't put a little more thought into what they would do for feeding people into the profession on a 10 plus year time scale. They should fund more anime, among other reasons, but that's neither here nor there. So if we can talk a little bit more about the actual pedagogy. I know what some of the lessons are, but of course, spoiling the lesson or giving people like differential access to the lessons prior to the lesson happening seem like negative, both for pedagogical purposes and also sorts of other purposes. But speaking generally, what's one lesson you would like to teach people, and like what's the non-obvious thing about how to teach that lesson?
Yeah, it might be useful if I back up for a moment and explain a little about our overall structure of our bootcamp.
Mm-hmm.
So when people walk through the door, the very first thing we do is have them start trading. Absolute number one, immediately just throw people in without explaining the rules, without explaining too much logic about, what is all the syntax going to look like. We say, hey, we're going to go around, play this trading game, and we get them started and correct as they go. And that's because a very, very big part of our pedagogical philosophy is that the best way to learn how to trade is to trade, and figuring it out through making mistakes and being corrected as you go, and figuring out what happens when you actually try something and see what changes in the market as a result of that, and then can course correct if that was the thing you didn't want, is going to ingrain those lessons in you so much more strongly than something that's more lecture-based or something like reading out of a textbook. In order to cause that to take place, not just in our first hour-long class, but over the course of the entire 4-day bootcamp, a thing that we'll do is throw everybody into a virtual economy together.
Mm-hmm.
We have a pretend currency that we use called clips,
mm-hmm.
and everybody starts out the week with 2,000 clips and is told your goal this week is to optimize for maximizing the number of clips that you have by the very end. So we put people through a series of trading games, trading scenarios or simulations in which they go in trading either independently or together with a partner or team, and trade in a bunch of different scenarios that are intended to increasingly come to approximate real live financial markets using their play currency, using clips, and being able to see how their currency balance goes up and down over the course of the 4-day period. Mm-hmm. By the very end of the week, people have accumulated some number of clips in their balance as a result of both trading that they've done out loud with one another and trading they've done on our electronic exchange. And the final night, our after party is also an auction called Provide Your Own Liquidity, in which people can auction off bespoke goods and services that trading bootcamp students can spend clips on. Mm-hmm. So each of our modules over the course of the week of trading bootcamp is a few hour-long session in which there are some parameters for which people are engaged in a variety of trading exercises with markets that they can interact with much the way they would real financial markets, but not having to worry about putting their own money directly on the line. With the principle being that if the best way to learn how to trade is to trade, but in the real world, in order to actually trade, you are risking a whole bunch of your own money and potentially going to bankrupt yourself if you don't understand what's going on. It's best to give people a play version of this thing in which they can mess around and experiment and see what happens. One of the most common conversations I will have with somebody when they are in the process of doing some manual trading, or let's say writing a bot that's going to execute a certain strategy, is how do you know that your bot is going to succeed at what you're trying to accomplish? And they'll start explaining to me all the logic in their code or like what it is there that makes sure of it. And I say, okay, let's do it. If your bot can successfully perform an arbitrage, let's actually make it the case that an arbitrage, i.e. a strategy in which one can buy and sell in multiple markets in order to, at least in theory, take on a risk-free positive dollar value position or a flat position that still results in them making money in those markets. I say, great, let's set up the markets so that one could perform an arbitrage and see if your bot actually does this thing. See if that actually happens. And they're
I
like,
have a prior on how much success there is with it, but that won't spoil the story.
I think that, so occasionally this works. More often than not, the thing that happens is their bot fails to perform an arbitrage and they have no idea why. It's totally unclear to them why the arbitrage didn't go through. So the thing that we'll do from that is we'll unwind a step back and say, okay, what is behavior that you feel confident your bot would successfully do? Under what circumstances do you think it would trade? We write down some predictions about what the bot that they wrote, whether by themselves or with the help of AI models, which are now a pretty standardized part of our curriculum as well. What is it that you think will happen if the order books, if the markets that we are using for our simulated trading games look a certain way? They'll write down their predictions. Then I'll actually throw some orders into those markets to cause the markets to look that way. And then they'll notice ways that the behavior that they predicted did or did not occur. Then we'll all try to come up with what are our best hypotheses for why this did happen or why this didn't happen. Okay, what's the next step? Well, if your hypothesis is correct, then what would happen under conditions ABC? Now let's go and test those conditions. And by actually seeing the ways that the markets move or don't move as a result of the behaviors that they're taking, they learn in a way more ingrained, feel it in your bones way, whether or not the trades that they're hoping will happen, and what it is they need to change in order to bring that about. A shape of student that we very often get is someone who is quite talented at software engineering or at mathematics and quite good at reasoning from first principles and way less comfortable with just try things and see what happens as a result and be okay with making a few mistakes or experimenting with something before the point that you've gotten the exact right answer. Here's a pretty interesting selection effect we see. Among the students taking our class, there is sometimes a negative correlation between students who are very strong software engineers or very strong mathematicians and students who have what I like to call the trader mindset. These certain heuristics for, I can get something approximately right. I can get to an answer quickly and execute on that. I have a sense of what's actually going to happen in this market as the result of my behavior. A certain kind of scrappy willingness to try things and figure things out organically and have intuitions for ways things are going to go. I don't think these traits are negatively correlated in the population as a whole. I think these things are probably pretty positively correlated and track pretty closely other general traits like intelligence and critical reasoning. But among our students, I think we are selecting for students who have some interest in trading And we see a phenomenon that's sometimes referred to as Bergson's paradox going on here, where by restricting to that subpopulation, you're going to see people who are either really strong at math, software engineering, whatever it may be, or have this other scrappy, tradery characteristic that isn't as well defined and established in society in general that is driving them toward taking this class. One of the things I feel most excited about in this bootcamp is the way in which we can capture people with that kind of interest and help them figure out, what do I want to do with that? I have trader brain. I have something that allows me to get a good sense for what are the selection effects of my environment? What's going to happen as a result of my behavior? Why would I, who might be pushing these other buttons and who might my counterparties be? And how should I think about modeling a world in which they exist? And then I need to react to what they're doing. And if I'm reacting, what level of the game are each of us playing on, et cetera? And helping them figure out, how do I want to use that skill? What do I want to do with that talent? Do I care about quantitative trading? Maybe yes, maybe no. If I care about other things, what good is this trader brain mentality that I have and where should I apply it? I'm actually really not that invested in there being more quantitative traders in this world. I think a lot of people look at me and say, Ricki, you run a quantitative trading business. You invest all of your time in thinking about how to teach quant trading. You sure must care a lot about, keeping US equities markets moderately more efficient. I think for the most part, I really love teaching and I really love helping people figure things out. And I really do have this trader brain thing and recognize that it has some value. But I'm not at all convinced that the thing to do with that value is add another quantitative trader to the, efficient markets in the ways that they currently exist and make them moderately more efficient. And helping people identify this talent and figure out, what are the things I want to do with that? What kinds of strategic and mathematical and scrappy heuristic-based reasoning skills that I have do I want to apply to different parts of my life is something that excites me more than almost nothing else.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of, and we could ask the LLM someday and they'll tell us what the various unlabeled vectors are in human space. But whatever this trader brain or intuitive feeling is, there are some other things like that where, random example for guests of this podcast, people who have done professional gambling before are massively overrated. Some of that is selection effect. Some of that is that we fish in the communities we fish in. But some of it is like, if you're drawn to that particular weird thing, you'll be doing other high variance weird things in the rest of your life. And eventually, you might end up talking here about one of them. And I do think I could give a pretty good apology for society should put more resources than are obvious into getting U.S. equity prices and ETFs to be priced accurately. It's very important for many people's retirement. But be that as it may, also decimates the cost of people saving for their retirement because it's causationally related to the decline from paying 1.6% of assets every year for mutual funds to 0.06% for ETFs. But I'm very much getting into the weeds.
I love getting Patrick talking about this stuff.
Yeah. I am exactly the kind of guy I am. What can I do? I do love that you mentioned that you throw people into the deep end straight away and I feel we do so much in our society to tell people, you must not make the mistakes. You start at 100 points and can only go down from there. And you're going to be ostracized in class if you get a wrong answer in front of the teacher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And love giving people permission to be imperfect, particularly in liminal spaces like a game or a boot camp or similar, where this obviously isn't on your permanent record. You aren't burning a scarce resource here other than your own time and attention. Just try things and see where they work. One of the most impactful experiences in my life, and a pedagogy I see very, very infrequently, was when I got into my first Japanese class, and the first 2 words of the class written on the board were "no English." And you can go a surprisingly far way on learning a language without any basis in the language and no other language, as demonstrated by, every child ever. And be that as it may, I don't want to do digression into comparative Japanese pedagogy. So people have a goal of earn all the clips, but obviously that isn't the real goal. I would love if you could spend a few words on the tension between that the goal that is earn all the clips and the other goals that bring people to the trader bootcamp, does that generate positive sum trades for people?
I'm happy to. Before I go there, I actually want to piggyback a little on what you were saying about making mistakes. Because I think a pretty big part of our bootcamp is trying to get people comfortable with recognizing that they make mistakes all the time. The people they are interacting with, whether they be their partners on their teams or their counterparties on other teams in our trading games, also make mistakes all the time. That this is not only okay, but a thing to be closely modeled and understood about people, and to figure out what protections you want for yourself and what opportunities will be available to you in light of existing in an environment where a lot of people make mistakes.
Story of my life. So many people run around with a heuristic from the markets that is effectively the strongest possible form of the efficient markets hypothesis, where every company that has smart people and lots of resources must be investing all those smart people and resources at the correct margins at all times. And therefore, anything bad I see in the world is planned for some reason. And also, there are never mistakes in the plans, which is not a great model to run around the world, and you will miss many opportunities for positive sum trades if you have that model. Sorry, I have to rant on that one.
Yeah, I think that is... It's definitely true that this model breaks down. It particularly breaks down in environments where the conditions of those environments are brand new or are, very suddenly shifting or reacting to something that's happening in an environment that hasn't had a chance to adjust into an equilibrium yet. These are often the points where there's the most opportunity to be had. In the very first trading scenarios that we throw our students into, at the very beginning, are both the points where each student is least equipped to do good trading because they don't know what they're looking at yet, and also the point where the trading is best because competition hasn't yet eaten away most of the positive value that they'd be able to get by trading against, let's say, our bots or our automated market makers in the environments that we're throwing them into. One of the things that I try to emphasize to students about mistakes is when you are making a mistake, you are getting a great piece of data about ways that the human system can be buggy. And that is a piece of data that is useful not only in predicting your own future behavior, but also in predicting the behavior of both your teammates and your counterparties. And you want to hold on to that and take away a really strong lesson from it. Being loud about your mistakes, and this was something I learned from my former employer at Jane Street pretty strongly, is an extremely valuable thing. And it requires letting go of some ego. This is way easier said than done. I think everybody would co-sign the claim, oh yes, being clear about your mistakes so you can learn from them is a good thing. And it's much harder when you're actually making those mistakes and under pressure and have eyes on you to do so. But one of my favorite things is when I make a mistake in front of students. When I'm up in front of the class and I make anything from an arithmetic error, which let me tell you happens all the time, to some kind of fundamental reasoning error. This happened last week when I was talking about logarithmic returns versus linear returns versus other types of things like that. And a student called me out and I got to say, great. Of course, I was doing this deliberately so that you guys could learn the kinds of mistakes that people make. All the time that you interact with people, they're going to be making mistakes of various different flavors. And knowing which kinds you make are going to be really, really helpful at knowing both what to defend against in your own case and what opportunities might emerge as a result of that.
The bugs are carefully planned pedagogical content, which is both a joke but also serious. We had a couple of bugs in Starfighter back when it was still a thing. And one, sometimes people thought carefully planned pedagogical content with regards to the bugs that were not, in fact, planned. They were just me, a fairly experienced programmer, introducing bugs, as has never happened before from any programmer in the history of the world. But it is a good reminder that we live in an imperfect world where people do imperfect things. And a model that includes people doing imperfect things, particularly in the way which are like attractive basins for those imperfect things, will outperform a model which says everyone is always 100% efficient, homo economicus 100% of the time. But interestingly, do you have any planned bugs in the simulations before going to some unplanned bugs? And
I sure wish that we were at a point where having to write in planned bugs was a relevant pedagogical tool. Fortunately, we have so many unplanned bugs that this hasn't proven necessary. Let me tell you a couple examples of the kinds of things we see as unplanned bugs. So back in November, we had a system in which we'd set up a number of different markets, and these markets included individual stocks as well as ETFs that were aggregates of those different stocks combined. And the way in which our internal bots would reason about those markets and decide what to do is they would, let's say, flip a coin. And as a result of that coin flip, decide whether they were going to buy or sell a certain number of shares. So we had one bot, let's call it Alice. Alice is one of our standard hedge fund bots that decided to buy a number of shares. And the thing that Alice did was looked at the market, looked at the price, figured out what price she'd have to buy up to in order to buy 50 shares, and bought those 50 shares. And then her code said the thing you want to do is buy 50 shares. So she looked at the market and figured out what price she needed to buy up to buy 50 shares. And she submitted another order to buy 50 shares. And then she did it again and again and again. And at no point checked her position in order to see, had I actually already performed that action and bought those shares, and ended up in an infinite loop in which she kept buying and buying and buying because no condition ever told her that she had successfully satisfied this. A few really interesting things happened. One was the person who had written this specific piece of code on our team was busy talking to a team about their trading behavior, and nobody else on our team knew how to operate that code. And as a result, instead of, as soon as we realized this bug was happening because price graphs were looking insane and because positions were in all sorts of places they shouldn't be, it took 3 different people to track down the relevant person and get him to come back to the computer and shut down the code because nobody else knew how to do so. This was a major source of risk that we, the central exchange that ended up distributing 75,000 clips, far more than we usually give out to students, did not realize we were taking on. But had we paid any attention to the fact that only one person really understood our code base and had written this up, we would have realized was a major source of risk that we were encountering. Another source of risk we had was it was way harder for us to see these problems because we didn't always have all of the relevant graphs and charts up in front of us on the screen that would have showed us, oh my God, all of a sudden, there was a huge price spike in one of these charts. And therefore, something is going wrong. That something might be a student team doing something wrong, but it also might be us doing something wrong. And we should immediately check our systems and see what everybody's positions are, see what behaviors happened in the past few minutes, etc. Because we didn't have a good monitoring dashboard, we didn't have immediate access into this problem. And it took us way longer to notice it and intervene, and resulted in us losing a lot more clips into the ecosystem than we otherwise would have.
I love that the amount that you're paying for these learnings is so much less than so many postmortems have said about paid for these learnings in like real financial markets. This is the story of Knight Capital. This is the story of part of the story of FTX if you squint at it, part of the story of Mt. Gox if you squint at it. And I can probably come up with another 5 examples with more time to think. But yeah, graphs, have them up. They're helpful.
100%. I think like it was great because immediately following that, we got to tell everybody the story of Knight Capital, talk about the times that bugs in systems and the lack of other systems surrounding those to be able to suddenly shut everything down or step up and deal with this problem somehow in a kind of holistic way, to identify the problem and to step in and fix the problem, ended up biting us in the butt, much in the way that it has bit countless financial firms in the butt to the tune of a lot more than 75,000 clips, our pretend currency. This was just a fantastic learning opportunity. It was also a great learning opportunity for the students, for whom I see time and again the problem of it not occurring to them that the bug might be happening on the exchange side. They think, what is the story for what's going on here? Well, probably they're just confused about the fundamental rules of the trading scenario we're engaged in. Or maybe what this means is that, you know, somebody's like die roll or somebody's like secret information about the stock or whatever is at the extreme end, and not somebody's system is broken. Occasionally they'll think maybe another team's system is broken or maybe our system is broken, but it's very, very rare that they will generate the hypothesis the exchange made a mistake or the rules that we presented to them are rules that we are not succeeding at abiding by about what behavior we're going to have, either through error or through malice. While in fact, quite often we have some sort of bug in our system and we're having, you know, fewer and fewer of these bugs over time, but they definitely still crop up. And helping them understand that sometimes when you're looking at weird data, it's because things are breaking in parts of the system that weren't within your model of where things in the system might break is a pretty useful lesson for them to learn, because that absolutely happens in real financial systems all the time.
Yep. And indeed, there is you don't want to be having this discussion when things are crashing around you because they might be crashing faster than your ability to process information on the discussion. But one of the things in real financial systems is, for example, there's a rule book that's by the exchange. And in the case of things which are well out of the distribution, in the interest of orderly markets, blah, 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 like here's what we do. And then people are sometimes making guesses on, okay, contingent on trading right now, am I really trading, or am I going to be in a trade that is broken by the exchange post facto, which for obvious reasons exchanges don't like doing, but will do. And that's why there's a rule book. And so you have to successfully anticipate the operation of essentially the semi-judicial procedure that will be following the rule book to see, okay, should if you're offering me Google stock for $10 a share, you're mistaken. If I'm given that opportunity, very possibly I will not actually get the share. But should I want to buy Google stock at $10 a share anyhow? And then trying to reason your way through that. And again, must use to reason your way through that when you've reasoned your way through it before, rather than encountering the once in a decade bug and everybody trying to quickly reason through their first once in a decade bug, or find someone who's been around for 2 decades to tell them, oh yeah, this is just like 93 again.
Yep, exactly. I think that the other big takeaway that we got from running this experiment and finding out that we had this bug was it's pretty useful to have risk limits, even on systems that you think, oh, well, I've written them in ways that should cause them to never lose more than, 500 clips. So why should this be a problem? Well, if you can make sure that they don't lose more than 500 clips, or at least make sure as much as possible by, let's say, giving the account that is running that strategy no more than, let's say, 1,000 clips or something like that, you are going to be able to place much safer constraints on how much money you lose to this system than if you just treat everything like an admin account. Same thing for separating out your different accounts from each other, both for purposes of safety checks, like preventing these outcomes, and also for purposes of getting a better sense of which of my strategies are doing how well. Can I actually separate these out into different accounts and pay attention to the strategy that's doing market making and the strategy that's coin flipping and crossing spreads, i.e. trading with either the best offer, the lowest offer, or the best bid, the highest bid, depending on which side of the coin comes up. Or other strategies like those, we'll want to be able to, both for ourselves, be able to see how well these different quote unquote strategies are doing, and also demonstrate to the students, hey, look, this is what Mark, the market maker, as we call him, is doing in the markets at each point in time. This is how much money he's made or lost in each of these markets. Why do we think that is? What's going on in this market that makes it the case that Mark, the market maker, is making more money? What's going on in this other market that's making him lose money there, etc. And then this is one of the principles that we'll try to teach our students too when they're building bots and having those bots trade in these markets is, hey, it looks like you're trying to implement 6 different strategies here. If you have them all trading out of the same account, it's going to be pretty hard for you to answer questions like, how much money did I make in the past 5 minutes? And do I want to continue executing this trade or not? And is something broken? I think having a UI set up and having a infrastructure set up under the hood that allows you to easily answer those kinds of questions is going to make your interface with the bot way better. A lot of students, especially the software engineering savvy types, come in thinking, I just need to build a really good bot. I need to focus on getting, good latency and making sure that I understand that it's executing the arbitrage, etc. And don't focus nearly enough on UI and on how you can have good feedback loops between you, the human monitoring things, and the bot that is executing these trading strategies. And as a result, end up writing something that is 90% of the way to a good answer, but never know whether they've gotten there or not. And in some cases, end up losing tons of clips in our play money economy and would benefit a lot from something that is a much simpler, stupider strategy, a way, way, way less advanced algorithm, but allows them to know, am I actually making money? And iterate on that, especially in environments where a lot of their fellow students, a lot of their counterparties in that class are making mistakes of type 1 of 90% of the way to a really good, advanced, sophisticated arbitrage bot. But maybe now it's doing insane things that are setting up great opportunities for other people.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to see my code before and after working at Stripe, which is not in trading, but is in the financial industry. It got much more defensive after working with it. And I wasn't an engineer at Stripe, but the notion of like a for loop that can lose money on every iteration of the for loop is very clarifying for the mind.
Indeed.
And so there was something I wrote last year. Trivial bit of code, could have been 5 lines long, was 200 lines long because it was 195 lines of if you detect X, die. If you detect Y, die. Blah, 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 blah. And then a feature that goes into all my systems these days that I affectionately call the Madagascar button. Shut down everything. Make it very easy to shut down everything. It's called the Madagascar button because of a video game called Plague, where you're trying to kill the entire human population, and your greatest enemy is the president of Madagascar, who notoriously in the games community is capable of like shutting down your access to Madagascar very quickly unless humanity survives another day. If you want to survive another day, make sure the system has a Madagascar button in it.
Yeah, I think people are often pretty scared of losing this button. They're scared because of the sunk costs. We put so much work into setting up this system. If we just press the button and turn it off, that's no better than if we hadn't written something in the first place. People are scared because there are often, liability reasons in real financial markets to having your systems go down. If other people are expecting you to be providing liquidity, whether those be people to the tune of, your counterparties who are looking at markets and hoping they'll be liquid and only coming back if they are, or people like regulatory bodies. But in fact, the cost of not shutting down your systems at times that they might be doing risky things is such a greater cost, is an existential cost that you might be taking on. And having a culture that is okay with taking that short-term hit in order to not be in a state of deep existential risk is a pretty important thing to learn when you are trying to gain this set of trader heuristics. And I think a thing that applies in the real world too. There are a lot of situations where having the ability...
in manufacturing. In Japan, they call the big red button andon cords. But, you give anyone historically in well-managed Japanese companies following these set of manufacturing practices, you give literally everyone in the factory the authority to hit a big red button to stop the line if they detect a quality defect or that the process is out of control. And then, of course, you want to very quickly debug the thing that is causing the process to be out of control. But you would much prefer to be doing the debugging when people are realizing they're in an emergency situation and the process is out of control versus that car seems like it doesn't have a door on it. That's a little weird. Are we doing cars without doors today? Maybe if I wait until lunch to ask Taro.
Yep, absolutely.
You give people the intuition and allow them to learn for the low price of 250 clips that some ability to instrument their software and see what the actual operation of it and make that more comprehensible to themselves does. And so put more effort into these sort of things before you start trading for real money. I think that's one of the advantages that people who are doing this at firms have, in that there is institutional memory of these things, and often, a risk layer, a controls layer, built up systems that have successfully anticipated some of these problems. But I wanted to get a little bit more concrete on how we explore trading in the simulation, and particularly how trading helps to enable one of the primary functions of markets generally, which is to aggregate information about things that people might have privately, or where information is hidden or not well understood, and quickly broadcast it out to the market, and how multiple layers of traders reacting to other traders reacting to hidden information causes that to happen. So do you want to tell me about how many siblings you have?
Yeah. So this is the very first market we have people trade on. Like I mentioned earlier on, when people walk in through the door, before we do almost anything else, no connection to the Wi-Fi, no here's what the schedule is like for the week, we have them immediately start trading. And the very first contract that we have people trade on is how many siblings do we, the people in this room right now, have combined. So we're trading on the sum of the number of siblings of the people in the room, which is usually about a dozen people. It's going to include me, a co-instructor, and about 10 students sitting around in a circle playing a game of Titan or trade, where each person needs to put a new order in the market, either a better bid, a higher bid, or a better offer, a lower market, or trade a lower offer, or trade with an existing order in the market. And the contract itself is going to settle to the number of siblings that we have summed total, which means that, Patrick, if you and I are playing this game together with 10 other people, and I have 2 siblings and you have 3 siblings, and everybody else is an only child and has no siblings, then that contract will settle to a value of 5. The sum of our siblings will be 5. And anybody who bought this contract for a price of 4 clips being our pretend currency, will end up making a profit of 1 clip, the difference between 4 and 5. And anybody who bought this contract for a price of 20 clips, if it ends up being 5, will end up having lost 15 clips on that trade. Just as if you were to buy an apple in the market for $20 and then sell it back to market the following day for $5, you'd be losing $15 on that set of trades. Okay. So one of the exciting things about this is each person in the circle typically has a pretty good model of how many siblings an average person in the world has. And they have some hidden information, which is how many siblings they have. So usually at the end of trading, once things are all settled up, we'll ask people, how did you form your models? What did you do? And people will walk us through their reasoning. You'll usually hear something like, well, I know that the average household size is something like 2.3. Where do you know that from? Oh, I just have that cached in my head as a number from when I was young. Okay, sounds great. Therefore, the actual number of siblings each person has on average is 1.3 because you have to subtract yourself. Okay, sounds good. Therefore, if there's 12 people in this room, I need to multiply that by 1.3. And that's going to take me to 15 or 16-ish. And it's pretty important here that I emphasize the thing you need is not a hyper precise model that gets the exact multiplication right. It's approximately what are we trading around as a starting point when you get thrown into this, from which you can refine your model in a bunch of ways. One of those first points of refinement is someone will say, well, how many siblings do I have? That's a piece of information I have access to. Now I'm going to adjust things by a bit because I probably don't have exactly 1.3 siblings. Let's say I have, 4 siblings. That means I'm going to be adding another 2.7 siblings to whatever number it is that I produced by multiplying 1.3 times the number of people in this room. So now we have a bunch of people doing trades with one another based on models that are reasonable approximations of the world as a whole, and also have some hidden information about their family size. And as trades start happening between people, we'll notice that some people tend to consistently be on the same side of the order book. So if, Brent starts buying contracts and is now long 3 shares because he's purchased this contract 3 times, we think it's more likely that Brent has a higher number of siblings than the average number of siblings that someone in the room has. Likewise, somebody who keeps selling this contract is more likely to have fewer siblings, because if they're selling, then they think that the actual value is less than the prices that they're trading at. And therefore, they think that it's more likely, compared to other people, their fair value, their expected value for the number of siblings is lower. One of the inputs to that could be they just have fewer siblings themselves. There are other ways that people might have hidden information that aren't just how many siblings they have. 1 year ago, you and I recorded a podcast in which I made the now questionable choice of revealing how many siblings I have. Some of your listeners then signed up to take my trading bootcamp, and using that alpha, using their information that they'd gained, made some profitable trades as a result of it. This year, I'm going to leave that number a mystery, and people who want to do the research can go back through the books and find it. But for people in that position, they took on certain types of positions in the market as a result of their hidden information. And other people got to find out, other people had even more information than I had, because I had this cash 2.3 number from which I had subtracted 1 and then did some multiplication, etc. And I had my own number of siblings, but other people had their number of siblings and Ricki's number of siblings. And maybe they discussed this with a few other people in class before class started because they knew what the first class of this trading bootcamp was going to be. So they also knew other people's numbers of siblings, etc., etc. What does it mean about the environment I'm in that other people are willing to trade with me? How should I be updating on my models of the world in light of their willingness to do this trade?
I would love calling out here that it is the case that people have unequal access to information in the world. And many people's immediate sort of instinctive reaction here is, this is unfair, et cetera, et cetera. And the aesthetic appreciation for fairness does not lead one to make either net beneficial trades for oneself or utility to maximizing trades generally with regards to these things, and like learning early and often that, yes, congratulations. If you've been invited into this room, you do not have the same information as everybody else in the room. You will virtually never be in a situation where everyone has access to the same things. And also sometimes like, it seems like trivial in this example that like market moving information is one Google search away, and yet people don't organize themselves to do the one Google search. There are so many times in life where there are like lots of real dollars where market moving information is one LLM invocation or Google search way, and people don't organize themselves to do the Google search.
That's true. Yeah. And in this class, I often ban Google, though not always before the point that somebody has successfully looked something up. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are these students who, whether because of hearing a podcast or talking to me casually over lunch, let's say they happen to know that I'm from a religious Jewish family that then happens to have more siblings or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I'll have some kind of alpha in this market, whether or not I try to specifically intervene to enforce some sort of aesthetic standard of fairness or something like that. But I think that there's also this kind of like interesting game of there being multiple layers of what you think other people think in light of their behavior, what their models of you might be factoring in, and ways that you should be correctly modeling how many layers deep they're going. I think often we'll see people who don't model any layers to other people. They'll come in and say, okay, I think the average number of siblings is 1.3. And then I multiply that by the number of other people and take my number of siblings, and then make zero more updates beyond that in figuring out what is my fair value. What do I think my best guess about the expected sum of our number of siblings is over the course of the whole game. And you also see people in the opposite position of, well, I know that I don't know the answer and other people are making wise choices. So whatever the market says is probably just the correct answer. Who am I to assert my own beliefs into the market? I must update that everyone else has also already incorporated each other's information. As a result, that person doesn't end up inserting their own information into the market because they are, instead of overly confident in the model they started with, they're overly timid about inserting their own views and taking out some stake in this market. The thing that my wife often hammers over the head when teaching this class with me is trading means I think you're wrong. When you are trading against someone, you are stating that you have opposite views of the world. If I'm selling at a price of 20 and you are buying for a price of 20, it's because you think there are more than 20 siblings summed up among the people in this room, and I think there are fewer, and those worldviews are incompatible. We are doing a trade because we disagree about the value of this contract. In real life, when you're trading for a t-shirt, you disagree about the value of the t-shirt relative to dollars in a way that could be totally fine because I want the dollars more and you want the t-shirt more, and we're happy to do this trade because we'll both get what we want. But given that this contract, the number of siblings, pays out to be a number of clips, and the thing you're using right now to trade for it is a number of clips, in all likelihood, this disagreement about the state of the world, about what your beliefs are, is happening in a way where one person is going to be happy and one person's going to be sad. This is much closer to being just truly a zero-sum trade than a lot of the other kinds of trades we might experience in day-to-day life. So it's going to come from a disagreement in models where somebody at the end of the day is more right than the other person, perhaps because they have a more sophisticated model with more input points, perhaps because, they got lucky and somebody with a ton of siblings happened to be sitting in the room even though they didn't know about it. But that if the market is behaving as it quote unquote should, and everybody is doing the correct amount of updating their models of the world in light of other people's trading behavior, eventually we'll reach a point where it's trading around what the actual fair value is. In the market that we run, we have a way of making sure that it ends up trading around the true value, which is by revealing that hidden information into the market. Halfway through trading, we have people start getting up to the board and writing down the number of siblings that they have. So we have a growing ledger of, my name's Alice and this is how many siblings I have. And my name's Bob and this is how many siblings I have, et cetera, such that before trading even closes, everyone has written up how many siblings they have. And the market is by now actually adjusted to be centered on number of siblings. That is the true sum of the number of siblings. And we get to see as more and more information gets revealed, the market move closer and closer to that fair value, sometimes moving faster than others, depending on how big a surprise new information was. And we'll get to see whether the person who was buying and buying and buying indeed had a lot of siblings, or if they were buying and buying and buying and then write down a 0 and they have 0 siblings. Is this because they were just confused? Is this because their hidden information wasn't their number of siblings, but somebody else's number of siblings? How do we reason about that? So we'll alternate between, first taking turns trading, then having trading in this open outcry fashion, and then having open outcry trading while people's numbers of siblings are getting added to the board, and taking pauses for a moment and discussing what just happened. What trade did someone do? And what do we think it means about their state of beliefs? I'll very often ask somebody to explain what somebody else believes about the world as a result of their trading behavior. What can you infer about what's going on in their head? Where at the beginning, this is literally just about exercising the muscle of what do different words mean? What do different directions mean? If somebody put out a bid for a price of 20, tell me, what does that person believe? Oh, it means they believe that there are more than 20 siblings. Okay, now somebody else put out an offer at a price of 22. What does that mean? It means they think it's less than 22. Doesn't mean they also think it's more than 20. Is their choice to not sell to the person with the 20 bid also evidence about their beliefs? Why or why not? And we'll do a lot of Socratic reasoning of that form as the class progresses.
So I would think on a first order consequential level, after you get up to the board and give away your hidden information, you should trade less. Does that actually happen in real life or no?
Yeah. So often that will be a thing that we discuss through example, where somebody will get up to the board and right before writing down their number might do something like adding an order to the order book, and then they'll write down their number. And then sometimes someone will trade with them. And we'll pause and we'll say, hey, Joe, what caused you to want to add an order to the book right before writing down your number? And Joe will say, oh, well, it's because I knew my number was really big, so I wanted to add a bid to the order book. And then we'll get to go through these steps of, okay, Joe, so you knew that your number was, let's say you had 12 siblings. So you added a bid to the order book because you thought it was higher. What happens in worlds where once you write down your 12, people see that number and then they still choose to sell to you? What does that mean about their state of beliefs? Well, maybe it means that they were already modeling you as having a lot of siblings, such that when you wrote down your number, I guess 12 is kind of comically large. But let's say Joe had written down a 4. Maybe they had thought Joe has 7 siblings, and then Joe writes down a 4. Their willingness to sell to you is actually a sign that wherever their model was at, it had incorporated information about you such that now you're giving even more information and causing people to want to trade with you and should maybe regret having those orders out there. We talk about in what circumstances do you want to immediately say, I am out. I would like to clear all of my orders from the book and no longer have them posted because I would like nobody else to trade with me. That this is especially important when there's brand new information and information that moves the market a lot. And you don't necessarily think you're going to be the first person to do all of the necessary arithmetic to get you to the right answer. But instead, cases where you want to be extra cautious, get rid of your orders from the book, and then figure out, okay, this brand new information came out. It was a pretty big update. What direction should that move the market? And approximately by how much? And in light of that and where things were a second ago and where they are now, what do I want to do? Do I want to go in that direction? That all of these steps can happen before you have summed up every single line item, looking at all of the numbers that came before. And in fact, if you wait around until the point that you've done all the addition perfectly, you're likely to have missed the opportunity to do those trades.
Can I highlight a learning here that people encounter 30 minutes into their trading career, which nonetheless evades professional financial journalists, regulators, and members of Congress? The I'm out pushing the Madagascar button and canceling your orders that are on the book is actually quite common in market making. And various professional journalists and regulators and members of Congress believe that things like 97% order cancel rate means that the liquidity we're providing isn't real, is a reasonable model for the world, where it straight up isn't. And in addition to playing a toy game where obviously you're not trying to manipulate the market and no one is like being particularly invidious will teach you this. If you also just try to make a market maker for the first time in your life and do the most naive thing possible, you're going to end up with a 90+% cancel rate, says the guy who wrote A Naive Market Maker once in his life. Anyhow, so you learn real things that have real applicability almost immediately. And apparently, subpar ways to get that knowledge are getting elected to Congress and being on the committee for regulating the people that do this full time.
Sounds like maybe there's a demographic I could market this class to some.
Yeah, they might be a little bit busy, but who knows?
Possible.
They should wonder, conditional on you marketing this, is there an adverse selection effect to them? Sorry, I'm joking.
I think that one especially interesting lesson that people sometimes get toward the end of this class is that when we go around and talk about what models informed us, everyone has this cached number of, let's say it's 2.3, 2.1, something like that, how many kids there are in an average household. And since we're counting how many siblings you have, you subtract one from that and get to 1.3 or 1.1 or whatever it is. At that point, I'll typically pull the room and I'll say, okay, who in this room is from a household with 5 children in it? And Joe, who has 4 siblings, will raise his hand. Okay, who's from a household with 4 siblings? What about 3? Or from a household with 4 children? What about 3 children? What about 2? What about 1? Okay, raise your hand if you're from a household with 0 children. Nobody will raise their hand. And at this point, I think people will sometimes make the connection that the average household size incorporates households that have 0 children in them. But the average number of siblings that a person might have is not going to be a number that incorporates households of 0 size, because those people are not going to be represented in the room of people you're trading with on the sum of number of siblings. In fact, if you took all the people in the world and divided them up into different rooms, a family that has 5 children in it has those 5 children represented in 5 different rooms. Whereas a family with 1 child has that child represented only once. This point will cause students to realize there was something wrong with my model that caused me to go from 2.3 to 1.3 by just subtracting 1 for a person in a family. But wrong in what direction and by how much? Nobody I've met so far has been able to instantaneously get the math right and immediately figure out how to convert from their cash 2.3 number to a number of siblings. And the point I'm trying to make at this point in the lecture is not that you need to know how to do that math in order to do good trades. It's instead, you need to be able to think, what direction should this affect my model? Does this mean that the average person in this room will have more than 1.3 siblings or fewer? And the answer here is more. And by about how much? How important is this factor? Is this something I can throw away? Or is this something that is a major contributor? And how do I approximate about how much in order to reason about it? Because from there, you can either say, I'm just going to ignore this fact, it doesn't matter that much, or it kind of matters, because it means that if I think, half the people are from 1-child households and half the people are from 2-child households, and those 2-child households will exist twice as often, that actually is going to be a slightly bigger factor. And it'll help you realize what mistakes are other people making. Other people are going to underestimate how many siblings people have based on using that cash 2.3 number from which they subtract 1. And if they're going to be making that mistake, directionally, even if I don't have much special information, if I've noticed this phenomenon, I think that people are going to undermodel the number of siblings such that on the margin, I would be happy buying from the best offer in this market, even if I don't know much more. And even if the number of siblings I have is, 1 or 2, a typical number of siblings for someone to have.
And you're helping people understand the speed premium here, where your trades are happening throughout this entire discussion, presumably, right? Or minus some very small periods. And you can go down to your notebook and start plotting out scenarios. It's okay, I can't do the calculus in my head, but let me sketch a hypothetical curve of the US population and see how poorly I'm calibrated by. Or you could say, all right, I goofed. Maybe many of us goofed, and we all underestimated. And somebody is going to get to the we are all underestimating realization first. And maybe the only thing that you need to know is a lot of us were underestimating. So the price is wrong in that direction, and get in front of 4 other people making increasingly good realizations that I underestimated by 0.3 versus 1.2 versus et cetera, et cetera. But all those trades will go in the up direction rather than the down direction. And maybe the second person to be oh, wait, he answers that so fast. There, even in a room that is heavily selected for math ability, there's no way he has anything more than we all goofed, or many of us goofed. Maybe I don't necessarily need to update that much on he's placing a trade that has like one bit of useful information in it, but it's not that he has successfully picked out the number. Maybe I'm also willing to make the trade that like we goofed, and maybe we goofed a little bit more than people think is accurate. And I think my prior was like a minute to think of it as like it probably matters less than people think it does, but haven't done the math on that yet. And I'm interested on whether like actually doing the math helps you or not in that circumstance versus simply like trading the market in front of you.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of ways in which understanding who the other people are in the room who you're trading against and how sophisticated your models are relative to theirs is a way more important thing to answer quickly than getting your models to be slightly more sophisticated. Because if your models are better than theirs, even only by, some small margin, or maybe especially if only by some small margin, trading quickly on them is pretty valuable. If your models are worse, holding on until you've understood things better, but by default not trading is probably going to be a better idea. Maybe the thing you want to do with your extra resources is do some more research and find out, whether it be a math problem or asking other people or something else. And as a result of that, where do you want to focus your improvements in your model, or which kinds of trades you want to do, how much you want to do them, etc., can be pretty valuable takeaways from correctly modeling the pool of people around you. This is a pretty big part of trader brain. Figuring out what are the important things that I'm noticing and approximately how important are they? What direction do they push me in? And am I in a pool of people who also understand this thing? And if so, how much have their models already incorporated it? Are they getting there now? Are they going to get there in a minute from now? What kinds of trades do I want to do because of that? And finally, if I'm only now realizing that there's this interesting mathematical effect of translating from average household size to number of siblings, I am so sure there are other effects that I'm not realizing that come into play here, whether they be, the fact that the demographics of people in this room are not randomly selected from US households or from worldwide households, whether it be because the, population rates like at the birth point of me learning the 2.3 hash number were different from the birth ages of the set of people in this room right now, based not just on country of origin, but also age and also socioeconomic status, stuff like that. Whether it be the fact that I'm even being presented with this market is itself an update about the world, because Ricki might not have a normal number of siblings because she's choosing to give me a market on number of siblings. Maybe there's some kind of gotcha. Maybe there's some kind of extra piece of information here, whether it be her number of siblings or whether it be features to this market themselves.
I'm very interested in whether anyone does. I have just been surprised. I'm not exactly sure how I can work through this surprise, but continued on me being surprised in this lesson once. I think there might be another surprise coming, and I want to find out that and have a strategy ready to trade that versus like trying to figure out what this first surprise means for me.
Yep. And I think there's an interesting thing here with the number of siblings where it's a lot easier to be surprised to the upside than surprised to the downside. I think sometimes people will say, oh, well, I think the average number of siblings is actually higher because there could be people in the class with a lot of siblings and not people with a small number. And I'll say, look, the fact that there are households with a lot of siblings, that's already going to be incorporated into your cached average number. That number already knows that you don't have households with negative size, but you do have a few households with large size. But the point that surprises can happen in one direction much more heavily than they can happen in the other is a pretty good point, and the kind of point that allows you to think about if I'm in an environment that is more likely than random to have surprises in it. And those surprises have a skew as to what direction they can go in, then maybe I should be adjusting my expected value up. I think in general, it's a pretty important thing to know about not just financial markets, but all opportunities, that the set of opportunities you're presented with are not given to you from a random distribution of all possible questions or markets or opportunities that the world could face you with. Somebody else has either through deliberate choice on their part or through all sorts of selection effects, whether they be evolution or capitalism or something else, decided to, for some, strong definition of decided there, give you those opportunities because of some way in which your interaction with them having some kind of benefit. In my case, that benefit is pedagogical. I am not personally trying to pick off my students. I don't trade in this market. If I traded in this market, I would be at a huge advantage because I've seen now a tremendous data set of people in their first intro to trading class and how many siblings they typically have and what kind of mistakes they typically make. But I am trying to teach certain lessons and therefore choosing markets based on which markets will most effectively teach those lessons. And that's going to be true whether I'm trying to teach classes on adverse selection and nail it into people that they should be scared to trade, or teach classes on all the different wonderful sources of expectancy that do exist in markets and inserting more liquidity in the form of, asking one of my co-instructors to flip a coin and trade randomly with one side of the market at the point where what the market needs is more liquidity. And I want to incentivize students to enter the markets more and not less. A lot of the pedagogical choices I make are reactive to what that set of students specifically needs. If I have a set of students who are especially excited about, engaging in a bunch of degenerate coin flip based trades with one another, about aping for size, as I've recently learned from them, about other strategies of that form, I'm a lot more likely to show them ways in which markets can be unfriendly to them and ways in which they should be more thoughtful and diligent and conscientious of what they do. If they're too timid and too unwilling to approach the markets, I'm more likely to give them markets that do have more opportunities in them that they can approach. And this is going to be a lot more stark from me as a pedagogue who's trying to design classes in ways that will cause them to learn those lessons. But things like this will even happen in markets themselves. If somebody is, a really sophisticated counterparty, they're going to get less presented with opportunities to trade and take money from others because others will be more scared of them and less likely to want to trade with them. If somebody is willing to trade in a way that gives away some amount of expected value to others in order to just attain a certain position and go home, other counterparties will be more excited to want to trade with them. And likewise.
Yeah. And happens in the real market as well. And there's, as we've said a lot of the time, there's the level 1 realization, level 2 realization, and then as many layers down the rabbit hole one wants to go. The classic behavior in options market was a true statement that continues to be true. Retail does not have an advantage against institutional order flow in options or in equities for that matter. And therefore, there are companies that would buy the order flow of brokers that were selling options to retail because the hedge, et cetera, you could offer retail better pricing than you would offer institutional. And then Wall Street bets happened along. And you might think like the existence of Wall Street bets does not cause retail orders to get much more efficient relative to like true market prices. But what Wall Street bets did do is that certain brokers started to have much more skewed books on certain options than one would have expected. And then intuitions or models that the internalizers and other professional market participants had for the range of outcomes that could happen in options suddenly stopped working in that they were getting their own version of adversely selected where people were aping in 0 DTE, yada, yada, yada. And in the cases where they were descriptively wrong about like how long people could be irrational about GameStop before they went insolvent, unfortunate things happened to them as a result of that. So we've talked a lot about the one hypothetical market, and then as being the less hypothetical, the first one, alpha dropped on the podcast. But as time goes to infinity, people are getting more concepts added to their toolkits, and the design of the markets is starting to more closely approximate markets that exist in real life, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the thing that we've learned most starkly over the past year is however simple we think we've built it, we should probably make it even simpler, at least to start with. In order to cause people to really learn trading concepts in their bones, you want to start with an extraordinarily simple market, like one stock or one contract that they're trading on, with extremely well-defined settlement criteria and a well-defined set of behaviors during a period of time. And make things even easier, Every single order should have the name of the person on that order. You should have a trade log that shows who traded when. You should have people's positions be easily visible, etc. Because at the beginning, trading is super confusing. And however much in our heads as the instructors designing this curriculum material, a certain lesson might be clear, it's not going to be clear yet to the people who are encountering it for the first time.
And this is why we don't use real world instruments like, say, Bank of America stock, et cetera, because there are people whose jobs for their entire career is just subsuming themselves in the business that is, without loss of generality, Bank of America. And rather than spending the entire 4 days on correcting people's model of how banks makes money, you want to correct their understanding of how people's mental model of the world informs their trading outcomes.
That's exactly right. I think a lot of people come in thinking that they're going to get like a really good lesson in how to analyze a specific stock's returns and how to understand, which items in the market to buy. And I'm always like, look, buddy, I'm not here giving you investment advice. I don't have much alpha over the rest of the market in terms of which stocks you should buy and hold in your portfolio. I'm here to teach you something pretty fundamental about how traders think. And we are going to be doing kind of the most basic things, getting reps in of what it is like to trade those, the same way you would going to the gym and lifting weights or just practicing the same skill again and again and making it slightly harder each time. So we'll build up, first starting with an extremely simple market and then adding one new character to that market. Maybe that character will be Mark, the market maker, who has orders out on the order book at all times that are spaced the same amount, that have the exact same size as each other, that follow a very simple formula for what the center of that market is, such that if you buy a bunch from Mark, the market maker, he's going to come in with higher bids. And, once you've traded with some of his offers, he's not going to replace those offers, such that the center of the market will move around per the way in which your trading behavior with him pushes his center of his market. And then we'll add in, Bob, the coin flipper retail trader who bobs back and forth between the bid and the offer and trades with each one. And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll start to establish to people, what are the roles of these different characters in the market? How are each of them making or losing money? On what time horizons are they thinking? One of them might be a broker-dealer who's executing an order of a certain size on behalf of a client of theirs. What is it that they're going to try to do when they're executing that order? Are they going to do it all at once in one fell swoop at some point in this trading scenario? Are they going to do it incrementally? Can we identify their orders by looking at what times they send those orders? Can we identify them by looking at the size of those orders, by other things about their trading behavior? How can we go about figuring out who's who in this economy, who's who in this financial ecosystem, and what is it that we want to do in light of the sophistication and goals of the different counterparties that we're trading against? And like I said, we just keep learning that we want to make this simpler. It used to be that we would start out trading with all of their identities hidden, all of the information about who they are and their size obscured, all the different characters trading at the same time, and try to teach lessons like, well, you can identify that this person must be the one who's executing as a hedge fund because they wouldn't have done this if not for this, that, and the other, etc. Way too confusing. Instead, start out showing all of their names, all of their information. Start out with fewer characters. And as you add them, show their names and their positions and their information. Have a UI that looks a lot like what you would ideally want your student UI to end up looking like, that shows all of the positions and moves of each of the different characters involved, including their moves and what they're doing over time. And then you can demonstrate, what are the traits of each of these different characters and what are the behaviors that they're exhibiting, so that once you start anonymizing some of that information, once you start moving it closer to looking like what the US equities exchange might look like, you'll have the ability to identify certain distinguishing features that would be really hard for people to just produce on their own if thrown immediately into that environment.
This is the thing we did at Stockfighter as well, the game I made a number of years ago. And one of the things we did for these characters is, both for pedagogic reasons, start by being very explicit on this character is in the market and maybe amping up the characteristics of them far more than you would see in real life. So we had two Titanic hedge funds doing battle in one scenario, and one of them was always buying in ridiculous size at ridiculously far from the market, and the other was always selling ridiculous size at ridiculous far from the market. Both to make it really clear to the player that the fluctuations they are seeing are coming from actors A and B and nobody else, or only so much as they bounce off of A and B. And two, to like suggest to people, just the fact of you knowing, like the maximally legible version of this, that there is a price insensitive person who is buying in tremendous size, et cetera, is not enough to like immediately orient all of your thinking around that one fact. But you have to use what else you see to say, okay, if I wanted to take advantage of that, what would I be able to do which would not get me blown out by risk limits and the other things that we had in that part of the simulation? And so presumably after you've had some opportunity to do the table talk with people and say, okay, because this person is doing X, we see X and Y and Z in the order book, then you can take away the identifiers and the heuristics that make that obvious and just hope that people retain the sense in their fingers that, okay, the market is moving in this fashion. I've seen that before. And then, or maybe, 60% confident that I've seen that before. If I'm that confident, how much should I be updating my behavior based on that?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think causing people to be able to identify certain patterns in the market because they've actually seen those patterns themselves goes a huge ways. I think that we just keep seeing time and again that nothing works, at least for teaching trading, like causing people to actually trade and to notice certain patterns and certain behaviors, to have certain muscle memory in their fingers of what different kinds of trades look like. And that is going to get them so much closer to the goal of being able to do good trades when the opportunities actually arise than any amount of trying to reason from first principles or any amount of trying to memorize the full range of what kinds of trading behaviors could happen.
One of the things that trivially falls out of this model, which I think you mentioned last year, is that the people who come in with the best approximation of the number of people in the room, even if they bingo it directly, are not necessarily the people who make the most money trading, right?
Yep, that's correct. I think a lot of it will be about a sense of savvy about not just having a good model, but having a good sense of what the models of the other people in the room are like, and at what points our models are more sophisticated, at what points who's moving how quickly, et cetera, which will often be a pretty good way of getting people to be the ones who are making better trades because they understand who they're trading against and that for any trade that happens, there's somebody on the other side of it that makes it go right. It's not just who wrote down the best prediction at the beginning of class of what the eventual number would be. It's who did the best trades and who got to actually profit on the difference between the trades they did manage to execute and other people being willing to trade with them as a result, and the final settlement value. One thing that we will often do when it comes to helping people improve their trading and their models is when they come up with a model of how the world works, similar to what you just mentioned in Stockfighter, we'll want to see what does that look like in the extreme case. If their model actually makes sense, is it true that as you push it toward the extreme, as you say, okay, well, if in fact the price is going to move, this many clips for every additional share that someone buys based on the market maker's function, is it in fact the case that if you buy, 10 times as many of those shares, then the price will move 10 times as many clips upwards as a result of that behavior? Let's actually do that. Let's type in those numbers and see what happens. And this is one of the reasons I love working with play money here is we can actually test these hypotheses. Okay, you just typed in a contract size that is 10 times as large, but the market didn't move 10 times as many clips upwards as you were expecting. Why'd that happen? Is it that the equation looks different? Oh, is it that you ran into capital limits? What does that look like? Et cetera. And can actually make people produce hypotheses, figure out what kinds of extremal cases will best either falsify those hypotheses or corroborate them and allow them to keep seeking more information, and then just directly go forward and test it. And this will ingrain those ideas much more clearly in people's heads than any other method that we've been able to come up with so far.
So a thing that happens over and over again in financial markets, despite any number of smart people writing code, heuristics, procedures, et cetera, to avoid it, is the fat finger problem, where the order that the trader thought they were executing and the order that they physically typed into the system were not quite the same order.
Oh, yeah.
What happens for fat fingers when they happen in your simulation?
Another reason I'm thrilled that we are using a play currency.
Yeah.
Those orders are indistinguishable to our exchange, to our electronic trading system from the orders that are intentional, and therefore they go through. The thing that we do about the fact that fat fingers exist is we make sure that someone isn't in a situation where one fat finger is going to lose them their entire clips balance and take them out of commission for the rest of the trading session. So we will put capital limits on people during our trading scenarios where we essentially say, instead of trading out of your normal account, you are going to trade together with a team. Each of you will seed your team account with a certain number of clips from your personal balance. If you want, you can put more in and you'll just take out a fraction of clips at the end of this trading round that is proportional to how much money you've seeded it with. But by default, we try to encourage everyone to put in the same amount. And that way, if you, lo and behold, hit a fat finger mistake and lose all of your money and your team's money, at least you aren't all bankrupt for the rest of the entire trading camp long. This also helps people understand better parameters around capital constraints, which we haven't gone into at all yet. But under what circumstances do you want to be paying attention to how much money you're using in different markets where all of the trades you're doing might be positive, but having certain orders on the book might tie up your ability to go and perform other trades in other places, and therefore might not be worth it for the expected profit you'd be able to get there. But even going back for a moment, talking about the ways in which these risk limits for people will prevent them from just having one fat finger error blow things for everyone. A case that we often see is one of our teams will have somebody make some kind of error, whether it be a fat finger error or a reasoning error, or, decide they want to do something in their self-interest that isn't in the interest of everyone on the team. And other people on the team will be upset about this. And they'll be like, hey, this other person did trades that caused me to lose money as a result. And we'll get to do the very fun emotional processing activity of arbitrating what it is that should happen as a result of this. And this is one of many different ways in which one of the things that we're trying to teach at Trading Bootcamp isn't just how to do good trades as an individual, but what it means to do good trades as a team. What it means to work together with others through the difficult parts, like somebody makes a mistake and you've all collectively lost money, to the good parts, like two people trading together can be even better than additive because there's multiple different things you can see at once. And when there's just one market with super simple parameters at the very beginning, it might not be obvious why trading with other people is important. But once we've entered situations that have, 12 different markets at the same time and no one person can focus on everything, having a team working together is pretty good.
I'd love to just dig in a little bit on like the team dynamics and communication styles and similar that I assume people pick up as a result of this. Because like we said, when it's solo player mode on the most trivial market imaginable, there's still a speed premium for getting ahead of other people on realizing things. So is there a premium for like this team just talks better to each other than other teams do?
There is such a huge premium on this. Here are some of the places where that comes in. Take, for example, what we were talking about in terms of building bots and building arbitrage strategies. Last week, we ran one of our trading boot camps here at the Lighthaven Summer Camp Festival season event. And there were a handful of teams where each of the three people on the team were kind of doing their own thing. One of them was building an arbitrage strategy. One of them was building some kind of fundamental model of the world in which you would use the information that your team privately had to infer from that and market behavior, what you thought other teams thought, and come to some galaxy brain conclusion. And one team member was kind of floundering, uncertain what to do, and maybe looking through old trade logs, but not really being that helpful toward the team's goals. And I would go around and I would ask teams, hey, in the past 5 minutes, how has your trading been going? Have you made or lost money? This was often a pretty hard question for people to answer and a pretty good prompt that having some kind of UI that gives you insight into this is useful. How would you go about figuring this out? Well, I would look at the trades we've done and I would compare it to where the market is. Okay, how are you even seeing your positions? What page do you have those on, et cetera? But it would also cause people to realize that very often the two members of the team would be doing trades that had no knowledge of what other members of their team were doing. And as a result, sometimes were based on models that were inconsistent with each other, sometimes effectively looked like trading with themselves, whether it be through actually accidentally executing self-trades or through effectively trading with themselves when trading on different markets that represented the same underlying positions because of the ways in which many of these markets included ETFs or other arbitrageable assets. And sometimes would include things where, because they were trading in the same overall account, a person who would have successfully been able to track their own profits and losses if that was all they were doing wasn't able to because trades that their partner was doing would now muddy the waters and make it look as though they had some trading that they had done together that netted out to a different number from what it is that they would have done individually. That last problem can be solved through account management, but the first few problems, especially ones where each of you are taking in information about the world and coming to conclusions, but never sharing that information with each other, is going to be really, really hard for turning into doing good trades as a team when no one person can look at and see everything, and when choices that you're going to make are going to be dependent on what choices other people are making. When you have capital constraints, that means that you can only spend some of your clips in some of those markets. Deciding which markets are more profitable is way more important. When you have 12 different markets that you're looking at, often it'll be the case, whether by our design or by our night capital style bug, one of those markets becomes, 10 to 100 times more profitable than other markets. Having everyone on your team be able to quickly become aware of that fact and then focus all of your effort on the strategy that looks at that market, instead of each of you just plugging and chugging away at the thing you're doing on your corner of the universe and not paying attention to other people, is worth a ton at the times that are most important to be doing the right things. An exercise that we've recently started developing is you're going to sit down. You're going to work on your bot and your UI and your dashboard and which markets you want to open on the screen. And then you're going to swap. And your partner's going to sit down and you are going to have, 90 seconds to explain to them what they're looking at, what you've set up your screen to include. And then you're going to go silent. And they have to do all of the trading themselves for the next 10 minutes. And if at the end of those 10 minutes, your takeaway is, how was my partner so stupid? They got this wrong and made us no money, even though I built a great thing. Then you are not learning one of the basic concepts of trading here, which is that trading with another person means coming up with a system that will maximize for how many dollars you guys make in total, including in circumstances where you individually don't get 100% of the glory because you're not doing 100% of the work. And will result in you having a setup that is more robust to the different opportunity sets that your group as a whole is going to be exposed to. Because just like sometimes systems break and accidentally buy the same position multiple times because there's an infinite loop bug where you have some for loop keep buying the same position, or the Wi-Fi goes down and all of a sudden your internet is out, or you meant to type 10 and instead you typed 100, or you switched position and you switched your size and your price numbers, or you got a negative sign where you wish you didn't have one. So too, sometimes your teammate has the flu and the dashboard that they built the previous day still exists, but they don't, or they're not reachable by phone, or they're in the bathroom, or they got confused and overwhelmed, or they're going to look at a different market that's more important, but the market that they were watching would now benefit from someone watching it. And having a dashboard that is easily legible to a human being, and when I say legible, I mean bright reds and greens that are more bright, the more important the thing is, and large numbers where there should be large numbers, and don't require parsing a whole bunch of text and understanding each and every line of that text, because humans are really bad at reading paragraphs and paragraphs of words, but really legible and really good at drawing your attention in where it's most important to have it. You're setting not just yourself, but your team as a whole up for success way, way better than just building something that makes sense in your head or to your best approximation of what your code now says. That would
I would bet that some of the best teams by the is it a consistent team over the few days, or do people keep rotating?
We switch things up. The final day, you're with the same team all day. So up until then, you've typically done these 2 or 3 hour exercises with the same team, and then you rotate. We want people to get the sense of what it's like to work with different people. And by the final day, we throw you on one team and kind of keep you on that team the entire day.
Got it. So I imagine that many of the successful teams on the final day are ones that come up with a visual language, a style guide to their tools, some level of consistency, maybe even some level of we have a shared argo around what we're doing right now. This emoji always means, much more attention here, yada, yada.
Yep, exactly. Some kind of ecolect. And these are not huge teams. These are going to be 2, 3, maybe 4 people. So it's not as though we need a hyper sophisticated thing that total strangers could plug into. But having a system where everyone on the team can quickly and efficiently communicate with each other what's going on and why is that important and where is it that we should focus attention and what to do when this dashboard looks green, what buttons to press as a result of that can be really valuable. I think the one other lesson that teams often learn pretty well here is the value of redundancy. the value of having multiple different parts of the system that apparently seem to have the same goal. A claim for which I very often get the pushback of, oh, well, those should just be the same value. So why is it that you would need to do that computation twice? That's, a waste of resources. I think that redundancy is your friend in a bunch of different ways. One of the obvious ways is sometimes one of your setups will fail, and then having another setup is good, which is why in addition to having a Wi-Fi setup, you probably also want an Ethernet cord, and you probably also want mobile hotspots that you can plug in all of a sudden, because when your Wi-Fi goes down, you better believe a bunch of people's Wi-Fi went down, and a bunch of the trading is really good all of a sudden.
This sounds awkwardly specific. Did Wi-Fi actually go down at one of these events?
Wi-Fi has gone down at many of these events, not limited to, but definitely including last week's event at a certain point in time. But you also see this when it comes to like how to estimate a number quickly. A very common thing that will happen is for a number that you need, let's say, not even a precise thing, but an order of magnitude thing, whoever speaks up first will just anchor everybody else to that number. And now we're all stuck with that same belief, even if we would have produced other things. At Trading Bootcamp at Arbor, the company I run, we have a norm that anytime someone's going to say a number, whether it be in writing or out loud, we basically censor that number out, give everybody like 10 seconds to produce their best guess, and then everyone says their best guess. And unless we have better reason to do otherwise, we'll typically just go with the median. This will be great because most of the time, we have numbers that are within, 50% of one another. Sometimes we will produce numbers that are like orders of magnitude apart. And this will be a good prompt that we need to stop and think for a moment. What is it in our models that resulted in us getting at such different answers? If we have, let's say, multiple different ways of measuring how profitable a certain market is, where one is like, I don't know, how many dollars or clips in our case were traded in that market in the past 20 minutes. And another is how many different people are trading in that market. And another is how many shares have traded in that market, et cetera. Then at a time that there's some kind of mistake, like our metric for how many people are trading in a market was dependent on having a list of the accounts trading in the market. But now all of a sudden, the accounts trading in the market have changed because the account monitoring system changed. So that number is now showing, NA on our dashboard. At least we still have other systems set up. If we are doing something that requires dividing by a number that we think can't possibly be zero because we thought, prices must always be positive, but now it turns out prices are zero because we forgot what thing we were measuring and got something wrong. We want a dashboard that doesn't just start blinking infinity or nan, but still has some sort of numbers we can anchor ourselves to. So having multiple different ways of deriving an answer, of getting to some kind of approximation or heuristic for the thing we care about can be extra useful for points where those break. And same thing with people. You want it to be the case that for a given UI you've designed or a trading strategy, if one person gets the flu, someone else can come over and plug in. Or you can check whether multiple people are able to operate a thing to figure out how good is that thing itself.
I'd imagine that in the case where your subsystems are disagreeing with each other, taking notice of the fact that your subsystems are disagreeing with each other, particularly if like in recent time units in the market, like, oh, we went up from these basically never disagree to each other to they're always disagreeing with each other to something that's never disagreed once with anybody is now also in a correlated fashion disagreeing. Like maybe you should be spending a lot more time thinking about what's going on than one would be.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. I think it's very often there, mainly as like a catch to make sure we're paying attention when we need to be because something's different from usual. Something is broken in one of our systems that's causing it to output a very different number from what we'd expect. Okay, now we should all take a breath and look at it. Whereas if 4 people are able to very quickly produce numbers that are approximately the same, any of those numbers would probably be right. The median is probably slightly more right, but whatever, they're all probably fine. But that makes us a lot more confident to go forth and use that number and operate assuming that that's right and being able to do things quickly in a way that a trader often needs to, instead of having to, go through many more painstaking steps. And the more uncorrelated our ways of getting at that answer are, for example, instead of one person just saying an answer and everyone being anchored to it, but instead each of us computing it differently, and even better through different mechanisms, the more likely we are to succeed at getting values that we can feel genuinely more confident in.
And of course, there's the meta-rationality step here of if you have 4 people who are all coming to approximately the same answer, this is perpetually a resource allocation game where we have four smart brains here that we can put on any problem. If we're all coming up with the same answer all the time, then three of us come up with the same answer as efficiently as four of us coming up with the same answer. And maybe the fourth one should be thinking of something else rather than being dittoing here.
This is true. And of course, we're always having to make optimization decisions like this when there are trade-offs about resources. And at the same time, it is so overwhelmingly the case that I see people err in the direction of not enough redundancy that even hearing you say that, I notice myself flinching and wanting to make a case for why, no, you need more brains on this, because I'm so used to seeing people in the reference class of, I'm so used to being right. I almost always get the right answer. It's a waste of time for me to have to do a computation that someone else is also doing. Why bother? I think the other thing that people underappreciate is often they think what it means for me to do this equation requires me solving all the math problems to the last decimal place. Whereas what I'm actually looking for often is what is the number that you just pull out of your butt if you have 1 second to pull out a number. Often that number is still a pretty useful piece of information. But one other thing I'll say on the topic of getting at that solution via different methods is we have a new tool since, maybe last time you and I talked on this podcast, basically, which is asking an AI. We now have another algorithm through which to come up with an answer to a lot of our questions quickly, for which the mistakes that a human might make and the mistakes an AI might make are definitely correlated, but less correlated than a human and another human sitting next to them. And one of the tools that I will often remind students are in their toolkit when trying to estimate, okay, if we're going to, roll 4 D20s, what's the minimum value of those going to be? How do we calculate something like that? Is you can do something using certain tools you've learned in math class. You can do something by writing a one-line Python script to execute a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations. You can do something by just pulling a random number out of your butt and seeing approximately what is it. You can do it by taking a physical die and rolling it and seeing what happens when you try doing that a few times. And now you can also do it by asking a large language model, by asking ChatGPT or Claude or whatever model you might want to use, and seeing, are these answers remotely in the same ballpark? If they're not, let's dig into why. Often we can make good use of that LLM and find out why from there in a way that ends up helping us.
And I immediately start thinking in the lines of, okay, the people who are selected into this class know that LLMs are an option for them. Even if I'm pretty sure I have the right answer already, I want to know the answer an LLM gives to someone asking the LLM, because I think I want to trade against LLMs a lot, at least as of this point in life.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I think learning not just what methods I can use to make my answer better, but if I and a few others come up with different answers, it gives us data that we should dig in more. And it tells us what kinds of answers the other people in our environment are going to be coming up with, can be extremely useful toward that goal.
Relatively few of us, Quorum accepted, probably had LLMs will be fundamental to craft of trading on the boards a year ago. I guess you can check manifold records for that too. But what are the other interesting things that as you've iterated on your software and systems for this, for example, you've discovered, yep, this is really something that we want to put in the toolkit for everyone?
People have actually asked us a number of times, when are you going to have an online class? And we'd like to take this class, but we live in Europe, or we can only do the evenings and can't do a block of several days in a row. And we've been thinking a lot about what are the best ways to design these classes in ways that will be more scalable, in ways that will allow more people to gain access to them. One of these ways might be figuring out how to design these trading scenarios in ways that are basically trading games in a box that you can just spin up on your own computer and play, that you can open up to our exchange and run with a few friends, that don't require us to be in the room. I'm answering a slightly different question from the one you asked.
Sure.
Here we are, nevertheless.
This is, by the way, a classic PR training is if you ever get a question you're not prepped for, answer the question you prepped for instead. And so few people catch that in the world.
True enough. I'm always very happy to readily let people know that I'm deliberately sidestepping their question, but we'll come back to it in a minute. I think that we are still trying to figure out how can we do online education, or education that doesn't include us in the room, in a way that will still achieve a lot of the goals that we have here. I personally feel extremely resistant to having, Zoom or other mechanisms like that be the way that we are teaching things, because it's so important to me to get quality time with students. That might just be selfish because of how much I enjoy it. I love teaching people in person. I love seeing their faces light up. And I'm pretty skeptical about a method of teaching people that has everyone only interacting online. it's also because a lot of the way that we do teaching trading isn't just the content in the classes themselves, but actually immersing people in an environment of it over the course of several days where they're also eating meals together, making side markets on things, having conversations that overflow late into the night, sitting around the bonfire, talking to each other about trading and, life goals and philosophy and everything else on their minds. But I think that we are at the point where there's enough demand for online trading classes and online trading games that figuring out how we want to build that out is one of our clear next steps over the coming several months. Okay, let's go back to the question you actually asked, though. So you want to know what sets of tools are people using now in trading or be recommending for our students to use in trading? And I think my answer here is not super impressive because a lot of the tools that we really hammer on the head are do the more basic thing, not the more sophisticated thing. This idea that people think, oh, okay, I need a super fancy advanced LLM model set up in order to have any edge because the market is so competitive. And there's a sense in which that is true, that the market is really competitive, that the counterparties you're trading against are likely to be really sophisticated. And therefore, if you want to have any edge, you're going to need to be doing some, multi-factor like decomposition, complicated math equations in order to get there. But that there are ways in which learning the basic heuristics do need to come first, do need to come from having simpler models of the world that you can build those into, and can allow you to do trades in environments that are selected for being less competitive, less efficient. Marcus' hypothesis has squeezed everything out of it, and more selected for, can I identify which markets still have good trading opportunities for the kinds of trades that I do know how to do, the kinds that I am able to cover in the first few days of a curriculum like this, or through what my comparative advantage is. Maybe I'm really, really good at, predicting the outcomes of legal cases or something like that, because I just am a huge nerd for reading case law. And I have a really good sense of how, pharmaceutical companies are going to get ruled on compared to all of the existing prediction markets or financial markets or whatever it may be. Okay, I've found my comparative advantage. I have a story for why I would be getting something right where other people might not be getting it right because I have a high stamina for reading case law. And as a result, I'm going to find the markets that might have opportunities available for me where I'm actually adding something instead of having to build a hyper sophisticated model I don't understand in an environment already saturated with players who are a lot more advanced than I am. The thing that we're trying to do in our class is less build the most sophisticated advanced models and more build up people's skill set at identifying what different environments look like and whether those are the right environments for them to be engaging with. In the case of many of our students, that does include building really sophisticated models because the comparative advantage that those students have is being really good at a specific kind of math or a specific kind of options pricing or a specific kind of trading strategy and helping them figure out which environments are places where that trading strategy is most prevalent, where they can go and make good use of that scrappiness, of that math skill set, of that computer programming ability. Is a great thing that we can empower people with, but we are not trying to tell them, here are the complicated skills that you need to know all of in order to take on the world and the highest profitability places. We are trying to tell them, here's how to find where you want to be with the skills you do have and figure out which skills you're excited about investing in more and getting better at. And sometimes that might be using an LLM to sanity check an answer, but rarely is that going to be us pushing on you a thing that we predict will be way more complicated than you're going to be able to grasp and the amount of time you're going to realistically throw at it before trying to implement it. Because we don't want people to be overconfident, to lead themselves astray by chasing down a path toward riches that isn't really there because it has way too many adversaries along the route, and instead give people the ability to use the skill sets they have and the opportunity sets they're presented with to look out for their own interests using trader-like skill sets and frameworks.
On that note, I think this conversation unfortunately has to come to an end somewhere. Ricki, where can people learn more about you and about Arbor?
Great. So our trading bootcamp gets run now once every 6 weeks or so. You can go to trading.camp in order to find it. And for listeners to this podcast, you can go to trading.camp/complex to get an extra discount in there. in general, Arbor's working on a bunch of projects across markets, pedagogy, and game design. We have a game design conference coming up that will itself be a giant game in September here at Lighthaven campus. That's called Metagame 2025, and you can go to metagame.games to learn more there. And in general, anyone who wants to reach me can reach out Ricki@trading.camp or come hunt me down in person somewhere. I will talk to you until the sun sets and the cows go home.
I'm also going to try to write a game for third or so time in my life to have something to share at Metagame. So knock on wood, hopefully that our project will go well, but I won't spoil it yet. All right. Well, thanks very much, Ricki, for coming on the podcast again. And for the rest of you, see you next week on Complex Systems.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Complex Systems. If you have comments, drop me an email or hit me up at Patio11 on Twitter. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of new podcasts for SEO reasons, and also because they let me know what you like.